Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the part of the world you are listening to me from. You're welcome to another lesson on Bed series, Biology Explain This. I still remain your biology tutor, Peter Sabiodun, and in this lesson, we continue our discussion on homeostasis. In our previous lesson, the first in this series, we discussed the different forms of homeostasis. We defined homeostasis. We talked about the scope of homeostasis, and we talked about those things, the kinds of things that homeostasis does, and we or tries to get involved with. And we talk about the fact that homeostasis is geared towards ensuring that what you have the cells experiencing, you don't have a large deviation. That's what we rounded off with in that lesson. We said homeostasis is to prevent large fluctuations. There will always be deviations from the norm. Temperature will vary up and down, heart rate, there can be danger, anxiety, and things like that. You can run to a strenuous activity, and that activity would kind of increase your breathing rate. So there's no way as a living being that you'll expect a constancy. So we use the word steady. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a steady internal environment. And please remember, the internal environment is the tissue fluid, what we also refer to as extracellular fluid. That is the fluid that bathes all the cells, is the life of the cell. So what is the condition of this extracellular fluid? Remember, blood never comes out of the blood vessel because humans or mammals generally have a closed circulatory system. So remember all those facts as we go on in this second lesson. So come along with me and let's enjoy this lesson together. So let's look at our learning objectives in this lesson as we continue our discussion on homeostasis. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to definitely describe how homeostasis works, and then the principles, the mechanisms, and also be able to explain the mechanisms of feedback, that is both negative and positive feedbacks. And at the end of the day, you'll be expected to be able to appropriately apply these concepts and principles to practical instances that are requisite in examination questions. So let's look at the components or the mechanisms that homeostasis makes use of. One, homeostasis involves three components or three mechanisms, and you see them on the screen. You've got the receptor. You can also call the receptor the biosensor or the detector. Then you got the control center. Then you got the effector. Now, all these processes, all these components work together to ensure that there's a balance, meaning to prevent large fluctuations from the midpoint, which is referred to as the norm or the set point. You can also call it the reference point. So that's expected limits, okay, of that process in the body. That condition is referred to as reference point, set point, or the norm. So let's begin to look at these components one by one, beginning with receptors. Now, you know, in an office organization, you've got this place called the reception. Reception is from the word receive, to receive. So when you receive, so the place where you receive visitors is called the receptor. Okay, the reception rather. Pardon that. So the reception is where you receive. So the word receptor indicates reception, meaning to receive. So that component has the concern of receiving, okay, or let's say monitoring and receiving deviations from the norm. That is the part of the body that registers or records the deviation. So the receptor can be a cell or tissue or organ. For example, in the control of blood glucose level, okay, the receptors are in the pancreas. So you and in the nervous system is you got the nerve endings being receptors. So receptors can be cells, tissue, or organs. The important thing about receptors is to be able to monitor and register the deviations. And of course, having registered the deviation, they send signals or they send messages in different forms. Of course, if it's a neuron, the message will take electrical form, of course. And so receptors send messages to the control center. So we turn our attention to the control center, and that control center is also referred to as integration unit or center. Now, what does it do? Integrate means to bring together. Now, all the stimuli, all the registered deviations, the stimuli coming in from the sense organs and the different receptors, they are being integrated, meaning what exactly are the things going wrong in the different parts of the body. So receptors coming from the eye, from the so all the different receptors coming from the skin, cutaneous, you've got the auditory, you've got the visual from your nerve endings and the eyes, all of these. So as you are listening to me now, you're also watching the screen. So there is the auditory, there's the visual also, and also there is the cerebral, because your brain is trying to process what I'm saying and what you are seeing to make sense of this information. So there's this issue of integrating the different stimuli that you are receiving from the different receptors. And thirdly, now we come to the effectors. Effectors generally are muscles and glands. Effectors are muscles and glands. Now, why muscles? There are kinds of responses that require a muscle or muscles contracting to withdraw a part of the body from the danger that has occurred or that is about to occur. So imagine you were walking, for example, carelessly with your earpiece in your eyes and you're just using your phone and things like that, and then suddenly you discover that you are on the road, and then a truck was coming, or a vehicle or a motorbike was coming at top speed, was approaching you. Suddenly there's an just what you are seeing, the approaching automobile or vehicle suddenly registers in your mind, and something triggers your muscle, the quadriceps of your foot, of your legs, to suddenly contract, and then you just find yourself being able to move away from the approaching danger, that kind of thing. And if you step on a broken bottle or a sharp object, your legs also, the leg muscles contract to withdraw your foot. If you touch a hot object, the biceps, okay, muscles of the arm, they contract to withdraw your arm, that is your hand, from the hot object. So the effectors and muscles, there are times that the kind of response required is a hormone to be released. And when you are in danger or at risk, for example, adrenaline is released from the adrenal glands. Adrenaline has two effects, generally called the flight and the fight responses. And so the effectors generally are muscles and glands based on the kind of response required, because the control center would initiate the kind of response required so that you can restore the norm for that particular condition that the body is having to go through at that time. So let's look at still on the components. So look at this diagram. This chart is bringing all the components together. On your left side, you've got in blue the receptor that are also referred to as detector or biosensor. You've got the control center in the middle. The control center is a part of the brain. The control center is a part of the brain. So the brain has different regions for initiating different kinds of responses. Okay, so you've got the frontal lobe, you've got the lower part, you've got the cerebrum, you've got the cerebellum for balance. All of these regions, they initiate the kinds of response required, and they send signals. So after having received the messages from the receptors, and after having integrated them, the control centers will initiate the kind of response, and so they will stimulate or activate the effectors, muscle organs, to know what to do. And so look at that pathway. You will see that responses that you have, they take the form of what we refer to as negative feedback. So let's look at feedback next. So we are discussing or looking at feedback regulation. Now, your feedback, there's also feedback, there's also feed forward. Feedback means to go back to what started it all. So if a problem started your control mechanism, definitely there's a need to inform how it all started so that you shut it down. So that's a feedback, trying to feed back the way it all started. And so our feedback systems or loop or mechanisms involve negative feedback. That's one form. The second form is called the positive feedback. Now let's quickly look at negative feedback. Negative feedback, like it means to negate, means to counteract. That's a synonym now. To counteract, to oppose. Okay, so when there's a deviation, let's say an increase, for example, the increase is opposed or counteracted to lower the deviation. And if it was a decrease, okay, the response will be, by negative feedback, is to increase what has been lowered or decreased. So every time you think of negative feedback, just remember it's all about counteracting or opposing, okay, or nullifying the deviation from the norm. And then still on the feedback loops, now biochemical processes in cells generally operate in such a way that to maintain narrow limits. We've said that from the very first lesson, that the whole idea about homeostatic processes is to ensure that the deviations are not too large. Otherwise, there will be breakdown of that process, because enzyme systems are the first to be affected by unfavorable temperature, pH, and the likes of those variables or those conditions. So scientists have defined homeostasis as the dynamic constancy of the extracellular fluid. Dynamic means that you are constantly trying to restore the norm. So there's a reference point, which is the norm. That's the issue of the constancy. But it's dynamic because it's constantly going on. Because, like I said, a living being will be exposed to all kinds of deviations and all kinds of variations from the norm. There's no way you can have a permanent temperature in the course of the same day. Within a period of an hour, for example, the heart rate, breathing rate, temperature, mood, temper, all of these will have varied within the space of an hour. And so the idea is that you have to understand the issue of narrow limits. The narrower the limit, the better. That is, the more functional is what we can consider the homeostatic process. Like we said, if the deviation becomes too large, that is no longer negative anymore, because when you are intensifying the deviation, it indicates a breakdown of the homeostatic process. And so, like we said previously, death, okay, death or malfunctioning of any part of the body indicates that the homeostatic process that should have kept that part of the body alive or functional has broken down or failed. Still on feedback regulation, the internal environment of an organism is maintained through self-regulating system. I remember in the first lesson I also made reference to the fact that even the ecosystem operates by the law of homeostasis. We talked about energy releasing processes being balanced by energy requiring processes, hexagonic and endogonic as it were. And so the feedback and feed forward, they are part of homeostatic processes. Okay, so the feedback is all about a loop, okay, a loop of different organs or tissues or cells that ensure that what is supposed to happen next is favorable. So they try to ensure that the information getting to that part of the body is something has gone wrong and correct it. So the whole idea about negative feedback is to ensure that in all the processes of the body, in all the processes, you refer to those processes as physiology. So if you are studying medicine, pharmacy, or even nursing, all the paramedical courses, physiology is your major course as a medical student. And even in plants also have physiology. It's the way processes are carried out. That's what we refer to as the physiology. And so in this case, negative feedback is all geared towards ensuring that narrow limits are maintained, because large fluctuations will be intolerable. And like we said previously, large fluctuations indicate a breakdown of the homeostatic process or a malfunctioning of a particular organ or tissue that is central to that homeostatic process. Now let's consider a typical example of a homeostatic process, that is the control of blood glucose concentration. Now there are sugar receptors in the pancreas, okay, and there are cells. There's a region of the pancreas. Remember, the pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine functions. The pancreas's exocrine functions involve secreting digestive enzymes, which are packaged in the form of what we refer to as pancreatic juice. Okay? So down the pancreatic ducts from the achinous cells that you have in the pancreas, the juice that contains amylase, lipase, and trypsin, those enzymes, they flow down to the duodenum of the small intestine for digestion. That's the exocrine function, to secrete enzymes. But the endocrine function of the pancreas involves producing and secreting two hormones. Okay, now the region of the pancreas that's concerned with endocrine function refer to the region as the islet of Langerhans. Islet refers to small islands. Islets are smaller islands. So a collection of cells, they make up what we call the islets of Langerhans. Now, there's some cells referred to as the alpha cells. Okay, the alpha cells secrete the hormone referred to as glucagon. Now, don't confuse this with glycogen, glucagon. And then you've got the cells known as beta cells. The beta cells secrete the hormone insulin. So there are two hormones from the pancreas, and both of them have to do with the control of blood glucose concentration. And so what you have is that depending on whether the blood sugar level is high or low, because glucagon's role is to increase blood glucose level, because so glucagon is only released homeostatically when the sugar level is below the norm. And so you can imagine one of the effects of glucagon would be to stimulate the liver cells where you store glycogen to break down, that hydrolyze the glycogen to release sugar. Then of course there are also processes like gluconeogenesis, that is producing sugar, that is glucose, from non-carbohydrate sources. So remember that expression, gluconeogenesis. The one I referred to earlier on, to break down glycogen, is glycogenesis. And so all you are doing is that anything that can increase blood glucose level and restore the norm, that is what glucagon does. And so if anybody wants to shed weight, for example, it's very easy. Going to the gym is not necessarily going to help. Let me say that again. Going to the gym, taking a walk, of course, when you walk, brisk walk, for example, brisk walk will increase circulation, improve waste expulsion. You can expel waste and things like that, and your muscles are toned up and things like that, increase aerobic efficiency. But to lose the fat, you have got to cut down calorie. And so when there are no sugars coming from your diet anymore, glucagon can begin to stimulate the breakdown of the tissue protein. And so there's no way anybody can fast, for example, and still remain fat. It's very unlikely. Of course, depending on how fat you were before you began to fast. So if you cut down your intake, for example, over time, you see that you have lost weight. So a more efficient way to lose weight is dietary control. Cut down high calorie food, and glucagon is part of that. So glucagon can work on the adipocytes, that is the cells that store fat in the skin, to break down what has been stored, and you use the fat over time, and then you can gain weight. So, and then the glycogen stored in the liver cells, the hepatocytes, can also be broken down to release glucose. So those are the things that glucagon does. And of course, when sugar level is too high, insulin is released. In this context, insulin's role is to lower the too high glucose concentration to the norm. And what it does is any process of physiology that can lower blood glucose level, that's what insulin influences. For example, you can have increased respiration, increased fat formation. All of those things are things that you have insulin promoting, all in a bid to ensure that you lower the blood glucose level to restore the norm, because high glucose level can lead to all kinds of things. I mean, diabetes can be really terrible. In the extreme cases, can lead to blindness, can lead to gangrene, and the legs having to be cut off. Of course, there is the emaciation, because you begin to lose weight. The body is beginning, because there's blood in the sugar and it's not being absorbed into cells, and so they begin to break down the body tissues. So a diabetic begins to lose weight because the body needs energy, and it's going to get energy from the tissue proteins if it's not from the diet. And then of course there is the issue of constant urination, because the sugar level in the blood attracts water from the tissues. So the water potential from the cells brings water into the blood, and the blood volume rises, and there's constant urination. So there are so many complications. So it's important to understand the roles of glucagon and from the alpha cells of the islets, and then insulin from the beta cells of the same islets of Langerhans. So two different things, but both of them are involved in negative feedback control. Like I said, if you have hyperglycemia, sugar level higher than the norm, insulin is the one that is released, and I've explained what it does. If you have hypoglycemia, hypo means lower. If there's hypoglycemic condition, it's glucagon that is released to ensure that there's a build-up of glucose level to restore the norm in the body fluids. So examples of homeostatic process. So the chart you are seeing on the screen is to summarize what I just said about glucagon and insulin helping to control blood glucose concentration. Both of them are from different cells of the pancreas, and they work antagonistically. Very important to understand that. So study the charts, and because it's self-explanatory. And let's briefly look at positive feedback. Like I made reference to at the beginning and also in the previous lesson, positive means to encourage. To encourage meaning when a deviation leads to further deviation. So an increase leads to further increase, a decrease leads to further decrease. In other words, the deviation is being intensified rather than being opposed or corrected to restore the norm. Now, of course, every time you hear about positive feedback, it indicates bad news in quote, meaning it means something has gone wrong. Like we said, positive feedback means a breakdown of the homeostatic process or a malfunctioning of a vital organ like the pancreas or the liver. Okay, so on its own, positive feedback is not favorable. Okay, but when you have feedback process as an integral part of some processes of physiology, it can be very beneficial, very important to remember. So it's not every time that positive feedback is bad news. There are occasions where positive feedback is ideal. Let's look at these instances. One, when you have nervous coordination. Okay, if you go to the video, go to my YouTube channel and look at natural impulse generation and impulse transmission. Now, when voltage gated channels of sodium are opening for sodium ions to diffuse into the exoplasm, that they begin to depolarize the exoplasm until you produce an actual potential when you exceed the threshold. Now, that is positive feedback, because the more channels that open, the more sodium ions that come in. The more sodium ions, the more the effect of depolarization. And so the more, meaning you are trying to intensify what is going on. More channels, more sodium ions, more extent of depolarization. So that aspect helps impulses to be generated as action potential along the length of a neuron. Another example of positive feedback is what happens during delivery of a baby, childbirth. And then during delivery, towards the end of the pregnancy, there are signals being sent to the brain, and then the brain begins to produce, that pituitary gland begins to secrete, that the posterior pituitary region begins to secrete this substance called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin has an effect on the muscles of the uterus. Now, the uterus has two layers. It's got an outer myometrium. Myo means muscle. It's got the inner endometrium. Now, the region of the uterus that the oxytocin stimulates is the outer myometrium, which is made up of muscles. And these smooth muscles contract only in the case of delivery. Of course, abnormal stimulation can begin to induce early labor, but the idea is towards the end. So that means that if you have positive feedback, if oxytocin is released in the course of the pregnancy, not towards the end, it's going to be negative. It's not going to be productive. It can lead to miscarriage. So please note that. But we are looking at a beneficial aspect of positive feedback, where when it is an integral part of a process, it can be beneficial. So we are looking at the fact that with oxytocin stimulating the myometrium of the uterus, there's muscle contraction in the womb. The more the contraction, the more the baby is being pushed, and that contraction sends signals. So there are pain stimuli being sent to the brain from the womb. And so the more signals reaching the pituitary gland, the more oxytocin be released. The more oxytocin, the more the contraction. The more the contraction, the more the pain. Pain stimuli will be sent to the brain again, and so the cycle continues until the contraction pushes out the baby. That's the idea. So remember, oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary region, leading to contraction, then more pain. The pains intensify, pain stimuli sent to the brain again, and then that is intensifying the cycle of events. Oxytocin is released, contraction, pain, oxytocin, contraction, pain, until delivery takes place. That is successful or beneficial positive feedback. So look at the diagram you are looking at on the screen. The cycle is there. So you see the brain on the right side. So it's a cycle of events. So you stimulate pituitary gland, oxytocin is released, then through the blood is endocrine. Okay, there is contraction of the myometrium, and then baby is being pushed through the cervix. The cervix is the opening from the vaginal tract into the uterus, and though the baby is being pushed, so it's a beneficial. Of course, this beneficial positive feedback. But the issue of diabetes, for example, is a negative one, where the sugar level just keeps rising until it becomes detrimental to the health of the person. Like I said earlier on, it can lead to amputation, blindness, and other hypertension, frequent urination, and things like that because of positive feedback. And so you can study the slide. Okay, this one is talking about what happens when you are regulating temperature. Okay, so just study it because it talks about an intricate story about what's happening when you want to control blood glucose. Sorry, it's talking about temperature. It's talking about the hypothalamus stimulating this. So when temperature is high, what happens? When temperature is low, what happens? So hypothalamus is at the center of temperature regulation. So take your time and study the details of this explanation on temperature regulation under homeostasis. So let's look at factors that can affect homeostasis, meaning homeostasis can be affected by several factors. We just have a couple of them. One, you've got genetic factors can be there. Like I said, if somebody else inherits a need for gaining weight, no matter what the person does, the person will just have weight issues. And so then physical condition, there can be health conditions that can affect homeostasis, because if you are not feeling well, homeostatic processes can be hampered or inefficient or ineffective. Diet and nutrition, your intake should not be more than your expenditure. Stay active. Okay, the more active you are, even if you are eating junks, okay, you can burn them off and they will not build up in the skin to cause weight issues. And of course, there can be poisons. Okay, poison from snakes or scorpions or other harmful organisms. They can cause imbalance. The reason why these poisons kill is because they bind to certain pathways. Okay, they can affect pathways. They can bind to certain receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, and they can cause a problem. So snake poison, snake venom, all the venoms that we have, usually most of them are globular proteins that bind to particular receptors and they affect a pathway. Some can lead to muscle contraction, and that is the animal is incapacitated, cannot flee. So all kinds of things. Also, and the psychological health of the person. What's your mental state, for example? Okay, and then there can be side effects. So wrong medication. Remember, there is abuse of drugs and there's misuse of drug. You can't abuse paracetamol. So prescription drugs are not abuse, but the appropriate word to use when you are discussing drug use, is to use misuse. Misuse of drugs simply means not following doctor's prescription. Doctor says 10. You felt good after you took 5 or 6 and then you stopped. That is misuse. So under dosage, okay, and overdosage, they refer to misuse. But when you abuse is used when you are discussing drugs that are regarded as illicit, illegal, meaning they are banned. So when you indulge in the use of banned substances, so you got marijuana, you've got cocaine, you got the amphetamines, all those psychotropic drugs, they are the right word to use to describe their use or their intake is abuse. So your the kind of chemicals that you take can also have effects. I mean, even alcohol is a drug also, because it's an inebriant. It's got effects on the mood of the individual that's high on alcohol. So all of these are important. And of course, we got so all kind of drugs are everywhere now. Drugs that have names that are very scary. And if you know how those drugs affect the body, nobody needs to take those drugs at all because of the long-term effects they have on the health of those who take them. So as we round off these lessons on homeostasis, we've got those questions for you to attempt. Just about 9 of them. Of course, from if you are preparing for an examination, okay, you have past questions that you can also answer. And like I always said, if you have questions for us, please send them to the places that you are going to see on the next slide. You can touch, you can get in touch with me through WhatsApp, through my email, through my Instagram handle, and through the YouTube channel. So you can send in your comments, observations, you can, whatever the questions are, as long as they affect your preparation for your examination, we will be very eager to attend promptly. We are willing to work with you, to partner with you on your journey to success. If you want us to engage in online tutoring, we are available 24/7. Distance is not a barrier. Thank God for internet. We can use Google Meet, we can use Zoom, even WhatsApp calls can be done, WhatsApp videos. So on your journey to that examination, we are here to partner with you. So remember, you don't have to work alone. We can work with you all the way through until your success. So to your success, remember, share, like, and comment. Let others also benefit from what you are enjoying. If our lessons have been helping you, please spread it. Okay, like, share, comment, and you can even subscribe. Very important also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that's very important so that more people can get the information about our videos. We've got quite a number of videos cutting across different topics, from nervous system to endocrine system to all sorts. We are working hard to ensure that we cover as many topics as possible towards your examination. And so to your success, we cheer you up. It's going to be all right. You don't have to fail, and you will not fail, because we believe that you are called out for success and not for failure. So at the end of this lesson, attempt the questions that you have and treat other questions and get in touch. I'll be willing to assess your answers and do the corrections and work with you together. So see you next lesson. Bye.